Then she was gone, and Draven was alone with the weight of everything he'd destroyed. He didn't know if that made it better or worse. The old mountain monastery stood at the edge of the world, or so it seemed to those who made the pilgrimage. Built into a cliff face 3,000 feet above the valley floor, accessible only by a narrow path that wound through treacherous terrain, it was where vampires went to atone. To reflect. To strip away the accumulated pride and cruelty that came with immortality and remember what it meant to simply exist. Draven arrived on foot 2 weeks after Isolde left. He carried nothing but a single pack, no crown, no finery, no trappings of royalty. Just a man seeking absolution he didn't deserve and probably wouldn't find. The monks who lived there were ancient beyond reckoning. They spoke little, moved through their days with quiet purpose, and asked no questions of those who came seeking refuge. When Draven knocked on the heavy wooden door, the monk who answered simply nodded and led him to a small stone cell. "You will work," the monk said. His voice was soft, like wind through dead leaves. "You will meditate. You will sit with your actions and their consequences. And when you are ready to leave, truly ready, not just exhausted by the discomfort, you will know." "How long does it usually take?" Draven asked. "For some, months. For others, centuries. For you." The monk studied him with milky eyes that saw too much. "That depends on how honest you're willing to be with yourself." The days at the monastery followed a rigid pattern. Wake before dawn. Meditate for 2 hours in complete silence. Work hard, physical labor that left even a vampire exhausted. More meditation. Simple meals eaten in silence. Study of ancient texts about morality, consequence, and the nature of power. Sleep. Repeat. There were no distractions. No politics. No servants. No one to impress or command. Just Draven and his thoughts and the growing understanding of exactly what he'd done. He thought about the trial. How quickly he'd moved from finding the forged letter to condemning Isolde. How he'd dismissed every explanation, every plea, every desperate attempt she'd made to tell him the truth. He'd been looking for a reason to doubt her, that's what he realized in those long hours of meditation. Looking for proof that love was a trap, that vulnerability was weakness, that trusting someone completely would only lead to betrayal. His brother Theron's betrayal centuries ago had carved something fundamental out of Draven's ability to trust. And when Morgantha had placed that letter in Isolde's chambers, she'd known exactly which wound to press on. Had known that Draven would react with paranoia rather than love. Had known that his trauma would do her work for her. But knowing that didn't absolve him. Understanding why he'd done it didn't make it less monstrous. If anything, it made it worse. Because he'd known, on some level, he'd known that he was letting his past dictate Isolde's fate. And he'd done it anyway. The monks had a practice they called bearing witness each night. Before sleep, you spoke your sins aloud to an empty room. Not for forgiveness, there was no one to grant it. Just to acknowledge. To let the weight of your actions exist in the air between yourself and the darkness. "I condemned an innocent woman," Draven said on his first night. The words felt inadequate. Too simple for the complexity of what he'd done. "I tortured her," he said on the second night. Better. More honest. "I made her listen while I was with another woman, knowing she could hear, wanting her to hurt the way I thought I was hurting," he said on the 5th night. His voice broke on those words. "I broke someone who loved me because I was too damaged to believe that love was real," he said on the 10th night. "I chose pride over truth, certainty over investigation, vengeance over mercy. And when she begged me to listen, I turned my back," he said on the 15th night. "I am the monster in this story," he said on the 30th night. "Not my mother. Not the circumstances. Me. I made every choice that led to her suffering. And I don't know how to live with that." The monk who oversaw his confession, a vampire so old his name had been forgotten even by himself, spoke for the first time in weeks. "Good," he said. "Now you're ready to begin the real work." The real work, it turned out, was learning to sit with the guilt without trying to escape it. Without numbing it or rationalizing it or finding ways to make it more bearable. Just sitting with it. Letting it exist. Accepting that this was his reality now. Some days were harder than others. There were nights when Draven would wake from dreams of Isolde in chains, calling his name, and he'd have to physically restrain himself from running down the mountain back to wherever she was. There were days when the work couldn't distract him from the endless loop of what if he'd investigated before condemning, what if he'd trusted her over his mother, what if he'd been brave instead of broken. But the monks had wisdom born of millennia. The what-ifs are poison, one told him during a rare conversation. They keep you trapped in a past you cannot change. Better to ask, what now? What will you do with this guilt? Will you let it consume you? Or will you let it transform you? Draven started to read everything the monastery had on trust, trauma, and the ways power corrupted judgment. He studied texts about rulers who'd let paranoia destroy them. He meditated on the nature of love and why it terrified him so much that he'd sabotaged his own happiness. And slowly, so slowly he almost didn't notice it happening, he began to understand. Love had terrified him because it required vulnerability. It required believing that someone wouldn't use his weaknesses against him. It required faith that the person he gave his heart to wouldn't shatter it. And after Theron's betrayal, after watching his father broken by his mother's death, after centuries of political machinations where affection was a tool and sentiment a liability, Draven had decided, consciously or not, that love was too dangerous to trust. So when Morgantha had given him a reason to doubt Isolde, he'd taken it. Seized it. Used it as permission to destroy the relationship before it could destroy him. Better to be the one who broke things than the one who was broken. Except he'd broken himself anyway. Just in a different, more unforgivable way. I was a coward, he said to the empty room on his 90th night at the monastery. I saw love as weakness, so I destroyed it before it could destroy me. But love wasn't the weakness. Fear was. And I let fear turn me into something monstrous. The ancient monk who listened to his confessions nodded approval. You're beginning to see. But seeing is not enough. Understanding why you did it doesn't undo the harm. The question is, what will you do differently? I don't know, Draven admitted. Isolde doesn't want me. She shouldn't want me. Even if she survives the Nightsbane poisoning, even if by some miracle she lives, why would she ever trust me again? I've proven exactly what I'm capable of when tested. Perhaps, the monk said carefully, the question isn't whether she'll trust you. The question is whether you can become trustworthy. Whether you can build something new in yourself, not for her benefit, not to win her back, but because it's the right thing to do. Become trustworthy for no reward. Become better because you should be better. Because the man who hurt her shouldn't continue to exist. The monk stood, preparing to leave. That's the only real atonement. Not groveling for forgiveness. Not performing penance to ease your guilt. But fundamentally changing who you are so that man who condemned Isolde can never make those choices again. After he left, Draven sat in the darkness for a long time, turning those words over in his mind. He'd been thinking about this all wrong. He'd been focused on how to make Isolde forgive him, how to earn his way back into her life, how to prove he'd changed. But that was still fundamentally selfish. Still about what he wanted. What he needed. Real change meant transforming himself whether or not she ever forgave him. Whether or not she even lived to see it. It meant becoming someone who would never again let trauma override love, never again choose certainty over trust, never again condemn without investigating. It meant becoming someone who deserved to have loved her in the first place, even if he never got to love her again. The next morning, Draven requested additional texts on governance and justice. He studied case after case of rulers who'd made decisions based on incomplete evidence. He analyzed his own trial of Isolde with brutal honesty, identifying every place he'd failed, not listening to her full explanation, not investigating before condemning, not seeking corroborating evidence, allowing his mother's influence to cloud his judgment, using public humiliation as punishment. He wrote new procedures for the kingdom's justice system. Requirements for evidence. Protections for the accused. Separation between accusers and judges. Everything he should have done, codified so future rulers wouldn't make his mistakes. He wrote them knowing he might never implement them. Kael was regent now. Draven had abdicated. But he wrote them anyway, because it was right. He also wrote to Isolde. Not the desperate, guilt-ridden letters he'd written before. These were different. Honest in a way that didn't center his own pain. Isolde, I don't expect you to read this. I don't expect you to respond. But I'm writing anyway because you deserve to know what I'm learning here, even if it comes too late to matter. I've been thinking about the trial. About how quickly I moved from suspicion to certainty. I've realized that I wasn't looking for the truth, I was looking for confirmation of what I already feared. That love was a trap. That vulnerability would destroy me. That trusting someone completely would end in betrayal. I let my past trauma with Theron dictate your fate. I let my mother manipulate me because it was easier to believe you'd betrayed me than to believe I could be happy. And I made you pay for my cowardice. I'm not writing this so you'll forgive me. I'm writing it because you deserve to hear me say clearly, I was wrong in every way it's possible to be wrong. And I'm working to become someone who would never make those choices again. Not for you. Not to win you back. But because the man who hurt you shouldn't continue to exist. I hope you're finding peace in the mountains. I hope the healers are wrong about the night's bane. I hope you're surrounded by people who treat you the way you deserved to be treated all along. And I hope, someday, you can think of me without pain. D. He sent the letter with a courier, not expecting a response. 3 weeks later, one arrived. The letter was brief. Written in Isolde's careful hand, though shakier than it had been before. Draven, I read your first letters. All 20 of them. They hurt to read, but I needed to read them anyway. I'm not ready to forgive you. I don't know if I'll ever be ready. What you did to me lives in my bones now. I wake up sometimes thinking I'm still in chains. I hear sounds that remind me of the dungeon and I can't breathe. You didn't just hurt me, you changed me. Made me afraid in ways I never was before. But I believe that you're trying to change too. Kale tells me about the reforms you're writing. About the work you're doing at the monastery. And part of me, the part that still loves you despite everything, is glad you're becoming better. I'm not doing well. The healers say the Night's Bane has progressed further than they thought. I have months, maybe weeks. I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because if you're trying to become someone new, you should do it quickly. I don't want to die hating you. But I don't know how to let go of the hate when the love is still there too, all tangled up together. Draven read the letter 3 times, his hands shaking. She was dying. Truly dying. And he was here, on a mountain, working on himself while she faced death alone. He went to find the ancient monk. I need to leave, he said without preamble. She's dying. I can't, I need to go to her. Why? The monk's question was gentle but firm. Because I love her. Because she shouldn't die alone. Because I need to. Need to what? Need to assuage your guilt. Need to be there so you can feel like you tried. Need to make her final days about your redemption. The words stopped Draven cold. No. That's not. Isn't it? The monk leaned forward. She told you in her letter that she's trying to figure out how to die without hating you. She's doing her work. Are you going to interrupt that work because you can't stand the discomfort of not being there? But she's alone. She has healers. Friends. Peace. What she doesn't have is more time. And you rushing to her bedside, what does that serve? Her needs. Or yours? Draven wanted to argue. Wanted to insist that his presence would comfort her, that she needed him, that love meant being there. But he forced himself to sit with the question. Really sit with it. What would his presence give her? More pain? More complicated emotions when she should be finding peace? The burden of dealing with his grief on top of her own dying? Or would it give him relief? The chance to hold her hand, to whisper apologies, to feel like he'd tried, to make her death somehow about his redemption. God, he whispered. Even now, I'm making it about me. Now you see, the monk sat back. Loving someone means serving their needs, not your own. If she needs you there, she'll ask. Until then, the most loving thing you can do is continue your work. Become better. And let her die in whatever peace she can find. That's impossibly hard. Yes. That's how you know it's right. So Draven stayed. He continued his meditation, his study, his nightly confessions. He wrote reforms for the kingdom's justice system. He examined every decision he'd made as king and identified where pride or trauma had overridden good judgment. He worked on himself with a fervor that bordered on obsession. And he wrote to Isolde. Not asking her to see him. Not begging for forgiveness. Just sharing his process. His realizations. His slow, painful transformation. Isolde, I understand now why I couldn't believe you. It wasn't about the evidence was flimsy at best, obviously planted by anyone who looked carefully. It was about Theron. When he betrayed me, I decided that trust was a weakness I couldn't afford. I built walls so high that even I couldn't see over them. And when you came along, when you somehow managed to slip past those walls, it terrified me. So when my mother gave me an excuse to push you away, I took it. I seized it with both hands. Because it was easier to destroy what we had than to live with the constant fear that you'd destroy me first. I'm not excusing what I did. Understanding the why doesn't make it less monstrous. But I needed to tell you that it was never about you being untrustworthy. It was about me being too broken to trust. The monks here have a saying, the dragon doesn't burn the village because the village wronged it. The dragon burns the village because the dragon is full of fire and doesn't know what else to do with it. I was full of fire, trauma and fear and ancient wounds. And I burned you because I didn't know what else to do with all that pain. I'm learning now. Learning to sit with the pain without lashing out. Learning to trust that vulnerability isn't weakness. Learning that being loved is a gift, not a trap. I wish I'd learned it sooner. I wish I'd learned it with you, instead of destroying you in the process. D. Her response came 2 weeks later. The handwriting was even shakier now. Draven, your letters are helping. I don't know if they're supposed to, but they are. It helps to understand that it wasn't about me. That I didn't fail somehow. That there was nothing I could have done differently. The healers say I have weeks now, not months. The night's bane is shutting down my organs one by one. It's not painful, mostly. Just exhausting. Like my body is slowly forgetting how to function. Kale visits. He tells me about the kingdom. About the reforms you're proposing. About how the court is changing without Morgantha's influence. It sounds like you're building something better. I'm glad. That's not sarcasm. I'm genuinely glad that something good might come from this nightmare. I've been thinking about forgiveness. About what it means and whether I can give it. I don't think I can forgive you for what you did. But maybe I can forgive you for being broken. For being so damaged that you couldn't see the truth. Is that enough? I don't know. But it's all I have. Draven read the letter with tears streaming down his face. She was forgiving him for being broken. Not for breaking her, that was unforgivable. But for the trauma that had led him to make such catastrophic choices. It was more than he deserved. And somehow, it made the guilt worse. Because she was dying with compassion in her heart, while he lived with the knowledge that he'd killed her. I have to go to her, he told the ancient monk that night. Not for me. For her. She shouldn't die alone, and if there's any chance my presence would comfort her. Then she'll tell you. The monk's voice was firm. Trust her to know what she needs. That's the lesson you still haven't learned. Trust. So Draven stayed. And he waited. And he worked on becoming someone who would never again fail to trust the person he loved. And he prayed to gods he'd stopped believing in centuries ago that Isolde would live long enough to see the man he was becoming. That she'd live long enough for him to prove that her love hadn't been wasted on someone incapable of change. But mostly, he prayed that she'd live. Just live. Whether she forgave him or not. Whether she ever wanted to see him again or not. Just live. The letter arrived on a morning when spring was beginning to touch even the mountain's heights. 14 months after Draven had arrived at the monastery. 14 months of meditation, labor, study, and painful transformation. The handwriting wasn't Isolde's. It was Kale's. Draven's hands shook as he broke the seal. Asterisk brother star. Asterisk I don't know how to write this, so I'll just say it, Isolde is still alive. Against every prediction, every medical assessment, every piece of conventional wisdom about Night's Bane poisoning, she's still alive star. Asterisk, the healers don't understand it. They say the poison should have killed her months ago. But something in her, some core of sheer stubborn will, has kept her functioning. She's weak. She'll never fully recover. But she's stable. She's surviving, Star. Asterisk, she asked me to tell you. She said you'd want to know. She also said that if you're not ready to leave the monastery, she understands. But if you are, she'd like to see you, Star. Asterisk, not for a reconciliation. She was very clear about that. She just wants to talk. To see who you've become. She says she needs to know if her faith in your capacity for change was justified, Star. Asterisk, it's your choice, brother. But if you're coming, come soon. She's stable, but she's not healed. And she deserves to have her questions answered while she still has the strength to ask them, Star. Asterisk, K Star. Draven read the letter 3 times. Then he went to find the ancient monk. She's alive, he said, his voice shaking with emotion he couldn't name. She wants to see me. And will you go? I don't know. Draven sat down heavily. I want to. God, I want to. But what if I'm not ready? What if I go and I'm still the same man who hurt her? What if seeing me causes her more pain? Those are good questions. The monk settled across from him. Answer them honestly. Are you the same man who condemned her? Draven thought about it. Really thought. No, he said finally. I'm not. That man let trauma override judgment. That man chose certainty over investigation. That man was so afraid of vulnerability that he destroyed what he loved most. I'm not him anymore. How do you know? Because I've spent 14 months learning to sit with uncertainty. Learning to question my assumptions. Learning that being vulnerable doesn't make me weak, it makes me human. Well, as human as a vampire can be. He looked up at the monk. I've changed. Not performatively. Not to win her back. But fundamentally. In ways that will last whether she forgives me or not. Then you have your answer. But what if it's not enough? What if she looks at me and still sees the monster who hurt her? Then you'll accept that. You'll prove through your actions over time that you've changed. And if she never believes it, never forgives it, never wants you in her life, you'll accept that too. Because your transformation wasn't conditional on her response. Was it? No, Draven said quietly. It wasn't. Then go. Answer her questions. Show her who you've become. And whatever happens next, you'll face it as the man you are now, not the man you were. Draven left the monastery that afternoon, carrying nothing but the clothes on his back and the letters Isolde had sent him, carefully preserved. The journey down the mountain took 2 days. The journey to the human settlement where she'd been living took 3 more. He arrived at sunset. The settlement was small, maybe 40 buildings clustered in a valley, surrounded by peaks that caught the dying light and turned it golden. Kale had told him where to find her, a cottage on the eastern edge, built into the hillside, with a garden that Isolde had been slowly cultivating. Draven stood outside that cottage for a long time, gathering his courage. Through the window, he could see candlelight. Movement. She was there. Alive. Real. He knocked. The door opened. And there she was. Isolde looked different than he remembered. Thinner still, though not as skeletal as she'd been in the dungeon. Her hair was longer, pulled back in a simple braid. There were scars on her visible skin, marks from Vex's careful torture that would never fully fade. But her eyes were clear. Alive. No longer holding that terrible emptiness he'd seen in the crimson depths. Draven, she said. Not warmly, but not with hatred either. Just acknowledgement. Isolde, his voice came out hoarse. Thank you for agreeing to see me. She stepped back, opening the door wider. Come in. I'll make tea. The cottage was small but comfortable. A single room with a bed in one corner, a small kitchen area, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves full of books. The walls were covered with pressed flowers and herbs, the beginnings of the garden she was building. She moved carefully as she prepared the tea, each motion deliberate, conserving energy. He wanted to help but forced himself to stay seated, to let her have control of her own space. When she finally sat across from him, 2 cups of tea between them, the silence stretched. You look different, Isolde said finally. Older somehow. Vampires don't age, but you look worn. I feel worn. 14 months of labor and meditation and confronting every terrible thing I've ever done will do that. Kale says you've written an entire new justice system for the kingdom. I have. Protections for the accused. Requirements for evidence. Separation between judges and accusers. Everything I should have done for you, codified so no one else suffers the same injustice. Will you implement it? Kale will. If he thinks it's sound. I'm not. I'm not sure I should be king again. Not sure the kingdom deserves a ruler who proved so catastrophically untrustworthy. Isolde sipped her tea, studying him. That's not for you to decide. Whether you're fit to rule, I mean. The people will tell you. Kale will tell you. But you don't get to abdicate out of guilt. You don't get to run away from the responsibility of fixing what you broke. Her words surprised him. I thought you'd want me far away from power. I want you to face consequences. I want you to fix the systems that failed me. I want you to be better. She set down her cup. But I also want the kingdom to be better. And if you've truly changed, if you've become someone who can rule with wisdom instead of paranoia, then the kingdom needs you. Not the broken king who condemned me. The man you've become since. I don't know if I can be that man while wearing a crown. The temptation to slip back into old patterns will always be there. Change doesn't mean you'll never be tempted. It means you'll choose differently when you are. She leaned forward slightly. Tell me about the monastery. About what you learned. So he did. He told her about the nightly confessions, about bearing witness to his own sins. About studying the ways trauma had corrupted his judgment. About learning to sit with uncertainty instead of demanding certainty. About the texts on trust and vulnerability and the corrupting nature of unchecked power. He told her about the moment he realized he'd been trying to earn forgiveness instead of actually changing. About the monk who'd taught him that real transformation meant becoming better whether or not anyone ever acknowledged it. I wrote the justice reforms knowing I might never implement them, he said. Knowing Kale might rule forever and I'd never touch the crown again. And I was okay with that. Because the reforms were right, not because they'd benefit me. That's growth, Isolde said quietly. The old you would have made reforms to prove you'd changed. To win people back. This she gestured to the space between them. This is different. Is it enough? The question came out before he could stop it. Not for forgiveness, I know I don't deserve that. But enough that you believe I've changed. That the man who hurt you is gone. She was quiet for a long time, her fingers tracing patterns on her teacup. I've been dying for 14 months, she said finally. Or I thought I was. Every day, I woke up thinking it might be the last. And I spent that time trying to figure out how to let go. Of the anger. Of the love. Of you. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so sorry that you had to do that work alone. I wasn't alone. Kale visited. The healers became friends. I built this garden. She smiled slightly. I found peace, Draven. Real peace. For the first time since I met you, I wasn't defining myself by someone else's love or hate. I was just me. Isolde. Not the king's consort. Not the accused traitor. Just a woman with a garden and books and time to think. That's good. You deserved that. I did. And here's what I realized while I was dying, I don't need you to be different. I need to know I wasn't wrong about you. She looked up, meeting his eyes directly. For 2 years, I loved you. I believed you were good underneath the damage. I believed that if you could just get past your fear, you'd be the man I saw glimpses of, kind, thoughtful, capable of real vulnerability. And then you condemned me, and I thought I'd been wrong. That I'd loved a fantasy. That the real you was the monster who put me in chains. I was a monster. You were broken. There's a difference. She reached across the table, not quite touching his hand but close. If you've truly changed, if you've become the man I thought you could be, then I wasn't wrong. My love wasn't wasted. My faith wasn't misplaced. Do you understand? I don't need you for me anymore. I need to know for me that I wasn't a fool. The vulnerability in her admission broke something in Draven's chest. She wasn't asking for him. She was asking for validation of her own judgment. Proof that her love had been real, not delusion. You weren't a fool, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. Something worth saving. And you were right, it was there, buried under centuries of trauma and fear. But I was too damaged to access it. Too broken to trust it. He swallowed hard. The man you loved was real, Isolde. He couldn't survive the test you put him through. Not then. Not without destroying you first. And now he's stronger. Not because he's been tested, I pray I'm never tested that way again. But because he's done the work. The hard, unglamorous work of examining every broken piece and deciding what to keep and what to discard. I'm not fixed. Trauma doesn't work that way. But I'm aware. I know my triggers. I know when fear is driving my decisions. And I have tools now to choose differently. Isolde nodded slowly. Show me. Show you. Cale told me something recently. Something about you and Lady Sylvana. Draven's stomach dropped. What about her? She approached you last month. Tried to resume your relationship. Offered information about a council member who was supposedly plotting against you in exchange for being reinstated as your companion. Isolde's eyes were sharp, watching his every reaction. What did you do? He took a breath, steadying himself. I thanked her for the information. Then I told her that using intimacy as currency was beneath both of us. That if she had genuine intelligence about threats to the kingdom, she should report them through proper channels. And that I had no interest in a relationship based on manipulation and transaction. And the council member? I investigated through proper channels. Interviewed multiple sources. Gathered evidence before making any accusations. It turned out Sylvana was lying, trying to eliminate a rival who'd spoken against her in court. But I didn't condemn anyone based on her word alone. I verified. That's different, Isolde said softly. The old you would have acted immediately. Would have trusted Sylvana because it aligned with your paranoia. Would have condemned first and investigated never. The old me nearly destroyed everything I cared about. I won't be him again. They sat in silence for a while, the candles burning lower, the night deepening outside the windows. I'm not going to die, Isolde said eventually. The healers finally figured it out. The night's bane, it did its damage. But there was something else in my system, something they missed for months. An herb your mother had been giving me, supposedly for my health. It was counteracting the night's bane just enough to keep me alive, though it couldn't undo the damage already done. She kept you alive. Why? Because she wanted me to suffer. Death would have been too kind. She wanted me to waste away slowly, knowing I was dying, unable to do anything about it. Isolde's voice was matter-of-fact. But the healers found it. Once they isolated it and understood what it did, they were able to synthesize a treatment. I'm stable now. Permanently. I'll never be as strong as I was before the night's bane, but I won't die from it either. Relief crashed over Draven so powerfully he had to grip the edge of the table. You're going to live. I'm going to live, she smiled, and it was real. Genuine. Ironic, isn't it? I spent 14 months learning how to die with peace, and now I have to figure out how to live with it instead. What will you do? I don't know yet. Stay here for a while. Finish my garden. Read all the books I never had time for when I was busy being a consort. Maybe eventually. She hesitated. Maybe eventually return to the kingdom. Not to the castle, but to the human settlements within Nightborn territory. There's work to be done there. Bridges to build between humans and vampires. Policies to implement that actually protect both species. You'd come back. After everything. It's my home too. I shouldn't have to abandon it because you hurt me there. She met his eyes. And I think I want to see what you build. The new justice system. The reforms. I want to see if you really become the king you should have been all along. As what? A witness? An advisor? I don't know. We'll figure it out. She stood slowly, and Draven stood with her. But not tonight. Tonight, I'm tired. And you have thinking to do. May I see you again? Tomorrow? She considered it. Yes. Come for dinner. We'll talk more. He moved toward the door, then turned back. Isolde. Thank you. For giving me this chance. For believing I could change. For his voice broke. For surviving. I know you didn't do it for me. But I'm grateful anyway. I survived for me, she said firmly. But I'm glad you're becoming someone worth surviving for. He left her cottage and walked into the night, his heart lighter than it had been in 14 months. She was alive. She was willing to see him again. She believed he'd changed. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't love, not anymore, not the way it had been. But it was something. A foundation. A possibility. And for the first time since he'd found that forged letter in her chambers, Draven felt something that wasn't guilt or grief or self-loathing. He felt hope. The next 6 months unfolded slowly. Draven stayed in the settlement, taking a room at the small inn, working during the days on documentation for the kingdom's reforms and spending his evenings with Isolde. They talked about everything and nothing. About the kingdom's future. About books they'd both read. About her garden and his monastery and the strange paths that had led them both to this small valley. They didn't talk about the past. Not directly. That was too raw, too complicated. But it was there between them always, a ghost they both acknowledged without naming. Isolde grew stronger. The color returned to her face. She could work in her garden for hours now without exhaustion. The scars remained, both visible and invisible, but she wore them with a quiet dignity that made Draven's chest ache. He fell in love with her all over again. Not the desperate, consuming love of before that had been built on need and fear and the thrill of vulnerability. This was different. Quieter. Built on respect and admiration and the slow accumulation of shared moments. He watched her argue with the settlement's council about water rights and saw her brilliance. He watched her tend to a sick child and saw her compassion. He watched her stand up to a vampire merchant who'd been exploiting human workers and saw her courage. And he understood that he'd never really known her before. He'd loved an idea of her, his salvation, his moonlight, his escape from loneliness. But he'd never taken the time to know the real woman. The one who was stubborn and sharp-tongued and fiercely independent. The one who didn't need him but might, possibly, choose him anyway. One evening, as they sat in her garden watching the sunset, she spoke without looking at him. Kale sent a letter. He wants you to return to the capital. Says the kingdom needs you. That the reforms are ready to be implemented, but they need your authority behind them. What do you think? I think he's right. You've done the work. You've changed. And hiding in this valley isn't serving anyone. I'm not hiding. You're avoiding the test. She turned to face him now. You've become better in isolation. But can you be better under pressure? When there are threats and complications and people pushing your boundaries? That's the real question. What if I fail? Then you'll deal with the consequences. But Draven, you can't live your whole life afraid you'll become that man again. Either you've changed or you haven't. And the only way to know for sure is to test it. Will you come with me? Not as my consort. Just as yourself. To work on the human vampire initiatives you mentioned. To be there. She was quiet for a long time. I don't know. Being in the castle again. Walking those halls. Seeing the throne room where you condemned me, the dungeons where I was tortured. I don't know if I can do that. Then don't. Stay here. I'll visit. We'll make it work. Is that what you want? To keep me separate from that part of your life? I want you to be safe. To be comfortable. To not have to face trauma before you're ready. And what if I'm never ready? What if the trauma never fully heals? Draven reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand gently. Then we adapt. We build something new that doesn't require you to go back to places that hurt you. I'll be king from a distance if I have to. I'll relocate the capital to this valley. You'd do that? Upend the entire kingdom's governance structure rather than ask me to be uncomfortable? Yes, no hesitation. In a heartbeat. Because I've learned what matters. And power, prestige, tradition, none of it matters as much as making sure you're okay. Isolde stared at him, something shifting in her expression. You've really changed, haven't you? I've tried. I'm still trying. I'll probably always be trying. I think she squeezed his hand. I think I want to try too. Not living here forever. Not avoiding the castle and the capital and everything that happened there. I survived, Draven. I'm not going to let your mother take my home from me, even in death. You're sure? No. But I'll do it anyway. We'll go together. Face it together. And maybe eventually it won't hurt so much to be in those spaces. Together, he repeated softly. I like that word. She smiled, and it reached her eyes. Don't get ahead of yourself. We're not. We're not what we were. We may never be that again. I know. And that's okay. Whatever this is, whatever it becomes, it's enough. You're enough. Being allowed to exist in your orbit is more than I deserve. Probably, she agreed. But she didn't let go of his hand. They returned to the capital 2 weeks later. The castle had changed in Draven's absence. Kale had implemented some smaller reforms, had opened parts of the grounds to the public, had created councils that included human representatives. It felt less like a fortress and more like a functioning seat of government. The court's reaction to Draven's return was mixed. Some welcomed him back, believing he'd done his penance. Others viewed him with suspicion, wondering if a king who'd failed so catastrophically could be trusted again. And everyone watched how he interacted with Isolde. She'd taken rooms in a different wing, far from the royal chambers, far from the dungeons, in a bright tower that overlooked the gardens. She'd refused any title, any official position. She was just Isolde Ravencross, human advisor on interspecies relations. Nothing more. But everyone saw how Draven looked at her. How he deferred to her judgment. How he'd stop mid-sentence in council meetings to ask her opinion. How he never made a significant decision without consulting her first. You're making yourself vulnerable, Kale observed one day. The court sees how much you value her opinion. They'll use that against you. Let them try, Draven said calmly. I failed Isolde by not trusting her judgment. I won't make that mistake again. If the court sees my respect for her as weakness, that's their problem, not mine. And if someone threatens her to manipulate you, then I'll deal with that threat through proper channels. Investigation, evidence, justice. Not paranoia and immediate condemnation. He looked at his brother. I know what you're doing. You're testing me. Making sure I can handle pressure without reverting to old patterns. Is it working? I don't know. Ask me when I've actually been tested. The test came 3 months later. A council member, Lord Draven, an ancient vampire with significant influence, approached Draven privately with information about Isolde. Supposedly, she'd been seen meeting with known vampire hunters in the human settlements. Supposedly, there were letters. Evidence of ongoing communication. I bring this to you privately, Lord Theron said, his voice oily with false concern, because I remember what happened last time. I know how painful it was. But Your Majesty, you must investigate. We cannot afford another betrayal. Draven felt the old fear rise, immediate, visceral, demanding action. The trauma response, exactly as the monks had taught him to recognize. His hands wanted to clench. His jaw wanted to tighten. He wanted to call the guards, to search Isolde's rooms, to demand explanations. Instead, he took a breath. Let the fear exist without acting on it. Examined it. Why was Theron bringing this to him privately instead of through proper channels? Why now, when Isolde had been working publicly with human communities for months? Why frame it as evidence instead of concerns to be investigated? Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Draven said calmly. I'll have it investigated through proper channels. If you'll provide your evidence to the court investigator, we'll look into it thoroughly. Theron looked surprised. Surely Your Majesty doesn't need an intermediary? You could handle this directly. I handle all accusations of treason through proper channels now. It's part of the reforms. Draven stood, signaling the end of the conversation. If there's genuinely cause for concern, the investigation will reveal it. If not, we'll know that too. After Theron left, Draven sat for a long moment, trembling slightly from the effort of not acting on instinct. Then he went to find Isolde. She was in her tower, working on policy proposals. She looked up when he entered, and her expression shifted immediately. "What's wrong? Lord Theron just accused you of consorting with vampire hunters." He watched her go pale, saw fear flash in her eyes, not fear of him, but fear of going through this nightmare again. It broke his heart. "I didn't," she said immediately. "Draven, I swear." I know. He moved toward her slowly, carefully. "I know you didn't. But I need to tell you what I'm doing, so you don't think I'm investigating you. I'm investigating him. Why he made this accusation. What he hopes to gain. Whether the evidence he claims to have is real or forged." She stared at him. "You believe me? Just like that? Just like that? You've given me no reason to doubt you." He's given me several reasons to doubt him. So I'll investigate properly, gather real evidence, and make a judgment based on fact rather than fear. He took her hand gently. "I learned my lesson, Isolde. I won't fail you that way again." Tears welled in her eyes. "I was terrified. When you walked in here, when you said he'd accused me, I was right back in that moment. Right back in the garden with the dead moonflowers, hearing you call me a traitor. I know. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that my past actions have made you afraid of me. That's on me, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving you don't need to be afraid anymore." She pulled her hand back, not angrily, just needing space. "I need you to understand something. This fear, it doesn't go away just because you've changed. Every time something like this happens, I'll feel it again. The panic. The certainty that you'll turn on me. That's what trauma does. I know. The monks taught me that. Healing isn't linear. Trust has to be rebuilt over and over, every time something triggers the old wounds. Can you live with that? With me being afraid sometimes, even when you've done nothing wrong?" "Yes. Because I understand it. Because I caused it. And because I love you enough to be patient while you heal, however long that takes." The words hung in the air between them. He hadn't said them in over a year. Hadn't dared to. But they were true, and she deserved to hear them. "I love you too," Isolde whispered. "I never stopped, even when I hated you. And that terrifies me." "Why?" "Because loving you almost destroyed me. And I don't know if I'm brave enough to risk that again." Draven nodded slowly. "Then don't. Not yet. Not until you're sure." "But Isolde, I'm not asking for the same thing we had before. I'm not asking you to be my consort or my queen or anything that puts you in a vulnerable position again. I'm just asking to be allowed to love you. From whatever distance you need. In whatever form you're comfortable with. What if that's not enough for you? Then I'll deal with that. But you are not responsible for my feelings. You're not required to return them or reciprocate them or even acknowledge them. I'm telling you I love you because it's true, and you deserve truth. Not because I expect anything in return." She studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand again. "Okay," she said simply. "Okay. Okay, you can love me. From a distance. In whatever form. And maybe, someday, I'll be brave enough to let you closer again. But not yet. Not yet is fine. Not yet is enough." They stood there, hands linked, both of them healing, both of them trying. It wasn't the fairy tale ending where love conquered all and everything went back to normal. But it was real. And honest. And built on a foundation of hard-won change and painful growth. And maybe, just maybe, it was better than what they'd had before. The investigation into Lord Theron revealed exactly what Draven suspected: fabricated evidence designed to create chaos and undermine Isolde's work with human communities. Theron was tried properly, with evidence presented, defense allowed, and judgment rendered based on fact. The reforms held. The system worked. And slowly, the kingdom began to believe that their king had truly changed. Years passed. Isolde's fear didn't disappear, but it lessened. She didn't flinch anymore when Draven entered a room. She could walk through the throne room without hearing echoes of her condemnation. She could pass the entrance to the dungeons without panic seizing her chest. She even, occasionally, stayed in his chambers. By her choice. On her timeline. They built something new. Not a replacement for what was destroyed, but something harder one and more precious. Built on truth and respect and the understanding that love wasn't enough, there had to be trust too, and trust had to be earned every single day. On a spring evening 5 years after Draven's return from the monastery, they stood together in the rebuilt moonflower garden. The flowers bloomed white and perfect under the stars, their fragrance filling the air. "Do you remember what you asked me?" Isolde said quietly. "In the settlement, when we were first rebuilding everything? I asked if I could see you again." "No. Before that. In the cottage. You asked if who you'd become was enough. I remember. You said it was enough that I was trying. I was wrong." She turned to face him fully. "It's more than enough. You didn't just try, Draven. You succeeded. You became someone I can trust again. Someone I can love without fear. Someone worthy of the faith I placed in you all those years ago." "Isolde." She held up a hand. "Let me finish. I've been thinking about this for months. About what I want. About what we are to each other. And I think," she took a breath. "I think I'm ready. Not to go back to what we were. But to build something new. Something real." "What does that mean?" "It means yes." "Yes to what?" "You never actually asked," she said, smiling slightly. "But I'm answering anyway. Yes, I'll marry you. Not because I forgive you, forgiveness is too simple for what we've been through. But because I choose you. The you that exists now. The man who groveled his way back from the abyss. The king who rebuilt himself and his kingdom. The vampire who learned that vulnerability isn't weakness." Draven stared at her, certain he'd misheard. "You'll marry me. If you still want that. If you can accept that I'll probably always carry some scars from what happened. That I'll have bad days when the trauma is too fresh. That I'll need space sometimes, and patience, and understanding." Yes, the word came out hoarse. "God, yes. Every day for the rest of time, yes. But Isolde, you don't have to do this. You don't owe me anything. I'm not doing it for you." She took his hands, holding them gently. "I'm doing it for me. Because I survived. Because I rebuilt myself. Because I'm not going to let your past mistakes keep me from choosing love when I've found it again. I don't deserve you. No. But you've earned me. There's a difference." She smiled. "You've spent 5 years proving, every single day, that you changed. That you learned. That you're trustworthy. And I believe it now. Not because I want to. But because it's true." Draven pulled her into his arms, slowly, carefully, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, when she leaned into him instead, he let himself believe it. That this was real. That they'd survived. That love, combined with honesty and work and time, could heal even the deepest wounds. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I will love you until the stars go dark. And this time, I'll prove it every single day." "I know," she said simply. "That's why I'm saying yes." They were married in the moonflower garden, surrounded by friends and family and the ghosts of who they'd been. It wasn't the fairy tale wedding befitting a king and his queen. It was small, intimate, honest. And when Draven made his vows, promising to trust before condemning, to investigate before judging, to choose love over fear every single day, everyone present knew he meant it. Because they'd watched him live those promises for 5 years already. When Isolde made her vows, promising to be brave, to give him chances to prove himself, to build something new rather than clinging to what was destroyed, everyone present understood the courage that required. Because they knew what she'd survived. This is the story of how a king broke his queen. And how he spent the rest of his immortal life earning the privilege of loving her again. It's not a simple story. It's not comfortable. It doesn't erase the harm or pretend that love alone can heal everything. But it's real. And sometimes, that's better.